Good afternoon and welcome to the Survive and Thrive webinar series. My name is Kelly Condon. I am the program coordinator for the Texas Oncology Foundation. Today we have Vanessa Pettijohn leading our discussion on fear of reoccurrence. Before we get started, I want to give you just a little bit of information about our foundation. Our foundation is dedicated to providing support to cancer patients in the communities where they live, work, and receive treatment. These Survive and Thrive programmings is just one of the ways that we are active in communities, both with resources and support to all involved in the cancer journey. We also want to send a big thank you to Texas Oncology for their continued support. Our programming would not be possible without their partnership. I'm going to go over a few housekeeping announcements with you just so you know what you can utilize during this presentation. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please submit these at any time during the webinar. Simply type them into the box on the right side of your screen under the Questions tab on your control panel. If you're viewing along with others at your site, please designate a scribe to submit your group's questions. We plan to respond to questions after the presentation, so keep them coming as you have them. If you are experiencing trouble, such as your window disappearing or your slides are not advancing, most of the time simply closing and reopening the webinar will usually fix these issues. If you're experiencing problems with your audio, the best solution is to call into the webinar and listen over the phone. There's an audio section on your control panel. By selecting phone call, the number you can use will appear for you. Throughout this presentation, Vanessa is going to be utilizing some poll questions. So when a poll shows up on your screen, simply select your answer. The presentation will continue after answers have been submitted. We're going to take a moment and just practice this and also get some useful information from you guys. So we would love to know who is on this phone call with us today. So select your answer. How many survivors do we have? How many caregivers, healthcare providers, healthcare professionals that are also survivors, or any others? Go ahead and make your selection. Awesome. It looks like we have a lot of survivors listening in today, and that is fantastic. We are so happy to have you all here. Vanessa has also provided a few handouts for you. There's a handouts tab located on your control panel. Here you will find the resources that are made available to you. During this presentation, these handouts are available to you to view and to download and to save for your further reference after this presentation. Lastly, we are recording this webinar, and so the online archive will be available for viewing after this live version. The recording will be sent to everyone who registered for this in an email, and then it will also be available on our Texas Oncology Foundation website. Again, we are so thankful to have Vanessa Pettijohn here with us today. Just to give you a little bit of background on her, she is actually a two-time cancer survivor herself. And through this experience, she gained the motivation to become a social worker. And she is now a licensed clinical social worker at Texas Oncology South Austin. We're so thankful to have you here with us today, Vanessa. Thank you for presenting, and take it away.
Thank you, Kelly. I want to thank the Texas Oncology Foundation for inviting me to speak today. I believe this is a really important topic. So I want to go over first some objectives for today's discussion. I'm hoping that this will be helpful for you and that by the end of this discussion, you'll come away with an understanding of what fear of cancer recurrence is, some other common emotional concerns during survivorship, what some common triggers are to fear of recurrence, and how to prepare for them. I also hope you'll come away with some strategies to increase coping with survivorship concerns and fear of recurrence. Before we dive in, I wanted to share a little bit about my survivorship story. I was diagnosed with a rare sarcoma in the muscle of my arm when I was a teenager. I went through 9 months of chemotherapy and 6 weeks of radiation. After completing my treatment, I was cancer-free for several months. I then unfortunately did have a diagnosis of a recurrence of the same cancer. It was still in my arm but had moved up from my forearm to my upper arm. I went through chemotherapy and an amputation. I've been cancer-free now for 16 years. I was kind of worried that by doing this webinar as a survivor, people would think I'd overcome or no longer deal with fear of recurrence. I still experience fear of recurrence at times, and I've certainly had my ups and downs with it and with anxiety about cancer in the past 16 years. For me, worry about recurrence has lessened over time, and I feel that over the years I'm continually growing and coping with it. I've put this quote up that I really like. It's from Jon Kabat-Zinn, who created a mindfulness-based stress reduction program. I feel it's a great representation of how we can't stop the waves of stress or times of fear that come along, but we don't have to let those waves knock us down. We can learn ways to help us to cope and to get through them. I believe talking about fear of recurrence and other emotional experiences during survivorship is really important. I had an amazing healthcare team when I was sick. However, at that time, I don't think it was as common as it is now to discuss survivorship concerns. I'm excited that helping survivors address emotional concerns and wellness is much more common now. There were definitely times in the beginning of my survivorship when I did feel alone in dealing with fear of recurrence. I would worry that maybe there was something wrong with me for having this type of anxiety. I didn't know that I wasn't alone in it and that it was a normal experience. I think just knowing about what to expect would have been really helpful for me back then. That's why I'm really glad to be here and being able to talk about it with everyone today. I think talking about it sheds light on it and just validates for everyone that this is a common concern. Before we get more into fear of recurrence, I'd like to discuss some common experiences for survivors once treatment ends. You might feel a mix of different emotions. Though it's a celebratory time when you finish treatment, it's okay if you don't always feel like celebrating. Sometimes survivors feel guilty for feeling sad after treatment ends. You may feel like you're supposed to be happy or grateful all of the time. It's important to give yourself permission to feel different emotions and just to be kind to yourself because you've been through a lot. Once you finish treatment, your follow-up visits, labs, and scans are typically more spread out, and you're no longer going to the cancer center frequently. You might feel more uncertain and isolated when this happens. There's a certain amount of reassurance and support that comes with frequent checkups and scans when you're in treatment. When these visits happen less often, some people describe this as feeling like they've lost their safety net. It takes time to get used to going less often to see your doctor. Another common experience is having more emotions hitting you after the treatment's end. Many times I hear from survivors that they're crying more or feeling more stress after treatment ends, and they don't understand why. For many, they're in sort of a fight or survival mode and that type of mindset during treatment. During treatment, so much of your time and your energy is focused on attending all of your appointments and coping with the side effects of treatment. There isn't always time to process the emotions you have about cancer and changes. For some, those emotions may surface when things have calmed down after treatment ends. They're no longer in a fighting or survival mindset and have more time to process everything. It's important to know that you're not alone in that experience. Another thing that may happen is that your expectations of your physical recovery might not match your experience, and that can be disappointing or frustrating. Once treatment ends, survivors often expect things to bounce back quickly to how they felt before the cancer. It takes time to recover physically and emotionally. Some things may get better over time, and some things may always be different. For many, there might be fatigue or weakness after treatment, and for some, there might be long-term physical changes, maybe from a surgery. When I finished my treatments for the first time, I expected to feel just like I did before the cancer. I remember going to the track at the school by my house, and I was just set on running. I wasn't able to run for very long before I was too tired to continue. At the time, I remember being frustrated, but looking back now, I wish I would have realized that that in itself was a big accomplishment for me. And so this kind of leads me into the fact that sometimes we can be our worst critics. I think having kindness and compassion towards ourselves is really important during recovery. Give yourself time to recover. This might require some adjustment to your activities or plans. Think about ways you can make your activity goals more achievable. Maybe instead of cleaning the whole house on Saturday, you do a few things Saturday and do a few other chores throughout the week. Things like that can just help you to have a little bit less frustration. You might also feel like you're not supposed to need support anymore, or that you're expected to not need support once your treatments end. And you may feel like your family expects you to go back to doing things all on your own like you did before the cancer. It's okay to continue to receive support, and communication with family, I think, is key. They may not know what to expect, and they may not realize recovery is a process that takes time. Let them know how you're doing and that recovering will take time. Tell them what things you're able to do independently and what things you need help with. That might change over time. And let them know how they can continue to support you emotionally. Fear of cancer recurrence. It's the fear that cancer could return or progress in the same place or another part of the body. It's a normal and common experience among cancer survivors and caregivers too. So how prevalent is fear of recurrence? Well, before we get into what the research says, I thought we'd have a poll to see how many people here who are survivors have experienced it. So we'll have a poll open now. All right, so it looks like the majority of attendees have experienced fear of recurrence. So it looks like it's very prevalent here, and that's really what I've found in talking with survivors too, is that most survivors that I've talked with have experienced it. And I also wanted to see what it was saying in research. So I have a couple of studies here that I found, and one was research reviewing studies of fear of recurrence. And it found that between 39 to 97% of cancer survivors reported some degree of fear of recurrence in other studies, but on average that was 73% of survivors. And then there was another study that had 50 breast cancer survivors who were 12 months past treatment, and they found that all 50 participants experienced fear of recurrence. Fear of recurrence can be experienced at different levels along a spectrum. It can range from mild to severe. A mild level of fear of recurrence might look like occasional thoughts about cancer and times of short peaks of anxiety after a triggering event that resolve after a few days. A moderate to severe level might be when you have more frequent thoughts about cancer, maybe more than once a week, and these thoughts may occur without a specific event that causes the anxiety. You might feel like you're unable to control the thoughts or have strong distress related to them. Finding ways to cope with the worry about recurrence is really important because high levels of fear of recurrence can impact your quality of life, and it can affect your ability to create goals for the future. For many people, the level of fear of recurrence does go down over time. However, if you are finding that you're experiencing a high level of distress or feeling like it's affecting your job or relationships or even moving forward, talking with your healthcare team or a counselor is important and can be really helpful. It's helpful to identify things that can trigger fear of recurrence or other difficult emotions about cancer. These could be places or events. For example, places that could bring on memories of your experience with cancer at the time of diagnosis or the memories of the treatments you had. Maybe doctor's offices or hospitals, getting labs, or when you get scans. Getting scans is a trigger for a lot of people because there can be a lot of uncertainty about what the outcome of the scans will be, and there's also time where you're waiting for your results. Events can trigger anxiety as well. These could be anniversaries of important dates, maybe the anniversary of the date of your diagnosis or the date of the last treatment. Holidays or life changes that make you think about the past or planning for the future can sometimes trigger anxiety about recurrence. And hearing other stories about cancer, whether in real life or in movies or shows, can be a trigger. Other things that might trigger fear or other emotions about cancer could be things that look like the chemotherapy you received, body changes, or physical symptoms. Going through cancer can change your relationship with your body. You may feel some distrust towards your body after cancer. You've also had to monitor your body, your physical symptoms, to closely watch your health and have your medical team closely observing you. It makes sense that you continue to have sensitivity to what's going on in your body after treatment ends. There isn't a switch that's turned off for this on your last day of chemo. Because you're used to monitoring physical changes, you might notice things more that cause anxiety. This is common and it typically does get better over time. One of the things that I learned about myself is that noticing physical changes is one of my triggers. I found my cancer both times when I felt a lump in my arm. So for me, I realized that I'm really sensitive to actually feeling a bump or a lump or a physical change. And it's really easy for me to go immediately to fearing recurrence when that happens. Now, I try to take a step back and try to analyze the situation. So often we respond to stress or worry by trying to avoid thinking about it or even to overthink it. When we try to suppress or avoid thoughts or emotions about problems, it might seem like this will make the problem go away in the moment, but it can actually create a bigger problem or more stress later. When we try to avoid thoughts, they're often still there, causing stress. When we suppress emotions, they can build up, and we might be missing out on an opportunity to take a helpful action. Instead, we can try to acknowledge the problem or the worry that we're having, and then we can move towards creating a plan to cope with it. And it's really common to get lost in thoughts of all the possible things that could go wrong, all the way up to the worst things we can think of. It may feel like worry is helping you to prepare for the worst, but we can actually spend a lot of our time stuck in worry and not be any more prepared. And sometimes we worry about things that aren't going to happen. Instead, we can try to take some time to think about and even write down the facts of the situation. For example, if you have noticed a new symptom, you might take time to write down, what is this symptom? How long has it been occurring? Has your healthcare team ever given you instructions on what to do if this symptom occurs? And then once you've taken a step back and analyzed it, you can determine how you want to move forward to deal with it. Managing expectations is also a really helpful way to reduce stress about cancer recurrence. You can talk with your healthcare team about expectations. You can ask The oncology team, if they offer a survivorship visit where you can review your follow-up care plan, where you can learn about possible late effects and recommendations for healthy living after treatment ends. You can ask if they have specific guidelines about things to look out for. Example being, based on your cancer type, are there certain symptoms that could be signs of recurrence? What is the prevalence of recurrence? And when should you call your oncologist now? And when should you call your primary care doctor? And how long should you monitor a new pain or a symptom before calling? I think that can be really helpful to help managing expectations going forward, is just to have some of those questions answered. But if you're having a symptom and it's not going away and it's concerning you, I think it can be helpful to call the doctor and ask what's going on. And even if it turns out to be nothing, just talking with the nurse or the doctor can offer peace of mind. I want to talk about some other ways to cope with triggers. When it comes to shows or movies being a trigger for stress about cancer, if this affects you, you may want to look things up, read a synopsis about a show or a movie before watching it to know if cancer is in the storyline. You may need to avoid watching these for a time, or you may want to plan to watch them at home with someone you can talk with for support. And having a plan for what you'll do to manage stress ongoing is an important part of wellness and self-care. Even planning ahead to do one small thing a day that helps you relax or puts you in a good mood can help reduce stress. If we manage stress ongoing, we're less likely to go over our stress threshold when we have a bad day or a triggering event. And I think it's a good idea, too, to have a plan for the day of a stressful event. So, for example, on the day of a scan, you might decide to bring a loved one with you for support. If you know while you're waiting for the scan you'll be anxious, you might decide to do something calming, like talking to a loved one or reading or listening to music. And also plan ahead to notice when worries come up without judging them, and reminding yourself that it's normal to feel that way. If it's possible in your scan, you might do a deep breathing exercise, or if there's another relaxation technique that works for you, you might use that. I used to have to be in the MRI machine for long periods of time. I didn't know about breathing or relaxation exercises at the time, but what did help me was actually taught myself to do the alphabet backwards, which is a really odd thing, but at the time it gave me something to focus on. And sometimes listening to music during the scans was helpful for me too. So kind of brainstorm and think about what would be calming for you. Coping with uncertainty can be challenging. While no one is certain that they'll be healthy and cancer-free, for those of us who've been affected by cancer, the uncertainty is something we're very aware of and wrestle with. One way to help cope with uncertainty is by making a list of what you can control or can't control. So an example of a list here is, I can't control having thoughts and worries, and I can't control if the cancer returns or doesn't return. But some things that I can control are asking my doctor what symptoms to look out for, following my follow-up care plan, trying my best to follow my doctor's nutrition and exercise recommendations. I can control how I manage stress and how I respond to thoughts and worries. And I can find ways to make sure I'm getting support. Once you've evaluated those things, you can move towards acknowledging and accepting those things you can't control, while also having compassion for yourself. And then you can move forward with creating goals or creating a plan for how you want to deal with the things that you do have some control of. So I talked earlier about how important it is to manage stress ongoing. Some ways to do that are continuing to participate in activities you enjoy. This could be hobbies you enjoy, or it could be something as simple as reading or taking a bubble bath. And regular exercise is really important for helping to manage stress. Getting social support is really important. For some people, participating in spiritual activities or getting spiritual support is really helpful. For some, that might be a religious organization or religious practice, and for others, that might be through getting out into nature. And then there are relaxation exercises. There are different things we can do to help us promote relaxation. I've got some listed here, and one easy way to do a deep breathing exercise that I like is just to spend some time counting your breaths. You want to make sure you're breathing from your belly or your diaphragm, and then you can breathe in slowly, counting to 3 or 4, whatever is comfortable, and then you might hold your breath for 1 second, and then you'd slowly breathe out, counting to 3 or 4. It's easy, but I think it really is helpful in helping to promote relaxation or to deal with anxiety. And practicing mindfulness is another helpful way to manage stress, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that next. And if you like to write, journaling is a great way to process thoughts and emotions. And then getting enough sleep is important. Fear and worry, they can take us out of the present as we think about what could happen in the future. Finding ways to get our attention back into the present and it can keep worry from stealing our ability to live and enjoy life. Connecting to the present helps us to get unstuck from our thoughts so we can move forward. Mindfulness is a practice that connects us to the present. It helps us to be aware of the moment. When we practice mindfulness, we practice paying attention without having judgment. There are 7 helpful attitudes that you adopt as a part of a mindfulness practice. These are non-judgment, being aware of thoughts, emotions, and experiences without judgment. Patience, a beginner's mind, which means having an attitude of seeing things with curiosity, as if you're seeing it for the first time. Trust, trusting in yourself and your ability to work through challenges. Non-striving, or having the mindset of simply being in the moment during mindfulness meditation. Acceptance, and this doesn't mean you're going to have to like a problem and not try to solve it. Acceptance here just means seeing things as they are and acknowledging them. And letting go, accepting things as they are and letting go of the impulse to hold on to thoughts or judgments. You can practice mindfulness formally, which is when you set aside time to do a mindfulness exercise or meditation, maybe setting aside a little bit of time every day. And informal mindfulness practice is when you remember to use awareness and mindfulness attitudes in your daily life. It's helpful to start by doing formal practices because, like anything else, it takes time and practice to build a skill. Then you can begin reminding yourself during the day to maybe bring awareness or openness or kindness to your time with others or to your activities. There are also some apps with mindfulness exercises that can guide you through different exercises or meditations. You could also look for classes or groups led by counselors in your community. I'm going to pull up a resource list here that I've included, and you'll be able to download this resource list in mindfulness tip list during the webinar. So on this resource list, I have a few different apps listed that offer mindfulness exercises, and you just want to be sure and check before you download an app just to see if it's free or if there's a charge, because there are some apps that charge. But I do know the Cancer Care app is free. And then if you're wanting to find maybe a group or therapist leading mindfulness classes, you can always do a search online at one of these websites. There's the psychologytoday.com or the goodtherapy.org. Or you could check with your social worker or your healthcare team to see if they know of any. I've also listed a few books here about mindfulness. And I do have a mindfulness tip page here also, where we've included some brief mindfulness exercises. And one of them I wanted to highlight was one where you can just spend some time noticing different senses in the moment. So that would be silently listing off everything that you physically feel. For example, you might get comfortable sitting in your chair. You could keep your eyes open or closed, whichever is comfortable. And then what you would do is think of all the things that you can feel. For example, I can feel my feet touching the floor. I can feel my back against the chair. And you just keep listing them off. And once you've run out of things that you notice about things you feel, you would move on to another sense, like noticing any sounds that you hear around you. And while you're doing this, if any distractions happen or other thoughts occur, it's okay. What you want to do in mindfulness is just notice those thoughts without judging them, and then move your attention back to your senses. So we've got a few others on here, and please download it and see. Hopefully that will be a little bit helpful for you guys. And next we'll talk about how to find support. So we talked earlier about how at times during survivorship, there are times where you might feel isolated, and it's important to find ways to get support. Talking with other survivors, whether in groups or peer support programs, is a really powerful thing. There's a shared connection there, and that's true for caregivers too. I'm always inspired by how supportive the members of my groups are with each other. They're really there for each other through good and bad moments. And I wanted to have another poll here. If you feel comfortable sharing, please let us know if you've attended a support group before. Okay, thank you for answering that. It looks like we've got some who have and a lot who haven't. So I thought that'd just be interesting to see. And, if you're ever interested in finding a support group, again, just talking with a social worker at your cancer center or maybe your healthcare team, they might be able to give you some good options and help you find a group that would be a good fit for you. Here in Austin, we have several options of groups through Texas Oncology and also through local nonprofit organizations. In online, if you're interested in an online group, I know that often Cancer Care will have groups online or even some telephone groups. And then sometimes other national nonprofit organizations will have things like message boards where you can, share with other survivors. And then peer support programs, they offer one-on-one support between a trained peer mentor that's a survivor or a caregiver and a mentee that's a survivor or caregiver. So it's one-on-one support where you get matched with somebody who has maybe been through the same type of cancer as you, or if you're a caregiver, somebody who's been a caregiver. And there's lots of different programs with peer support. Here in Austin, we have a charity called Regarding Cancer that does this. And nationally, there are programs through Immerman Angels, Cancer Hope Network, and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And I know there are others too, but I've listed those here. And then another option for getting support is attending a retreat. So this is typically maybe a weekend or a week-long event. And we have a few listed here through Real Recovery, Casting for Recovery, and Can't Make a Dream. And I have my references listed here in case anyone's interested in reading more on these topics. I'm hoping that this has been helpful and that there are things we've discussed that will be impactful for you, whether you're a survivor, a caregiver, or professional. Um, I'm sorry, I think I might have talked a little fast and we've ended a little bit early.
No need to apologize. Thank you so much for sharing, Vanessa.
Yeah, I'm glad to. This is fun.
Yeah, and I really appreciate your perspective as somebody who has walked through it. That's been really incredible just to hear.
Thank you.
If you're comfortable, we we have a few questions and just some comments that have been made that I can share if you are willing.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So one attendee mentioned that they are a mentor for Zero, the End of Prostate Cancer. So I don't know if you've heard about that or can speak about that group at all.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of that one, but I'm definitely going to look it up now.
Yeah. All right, well, just a few questions that did come in. Early on, when you were discussing some of the feelings or different experiences that people might go through right after treatment or anytime after treatment, I guess, you were talking about you may feel like you don't need support from loved ones, or you shouldn't feel like you should need support from loved ones. Is there, I don't know if there was something that you wish that your family members had done differently, or something, ways that you would have communicated differently or something like that. I guess the question is, what ideally would you want, how would you want your loved ones to support you ideally?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that it's really important just to kind of give family members an idea of what you're going through, because they might not know what to expect, and many times, and this includes me too, but also many times I've talked to survivors about this, that family members might also just think that once the treatment ends, things are going to go back to how they were before, and maybe they kind of don't offer. I mean, obviously, probably still supportive, but maybe they don't offer as much support as they were.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times I talk with survivors about just ways to kind of share and open up with family. And I think just kind of having that discussion of, well, I did finish treatment, but I'm going to have some time of just kind of gaining strength physically and coping emotionally. And I still kind of need support in these ways, and sort of kind of giving some practical guidance to family is good.
Yeah, so I feel like communication is just key.
Yeah, I think it is.
Continued communication.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, along the lines of communication, typically, I guess in your experience, is fear of recurrence something that medical teams are checking in a lot more of now?
I think it is becoming more common, and that's really encouraging for me. Because, when I went through treatment, it was a really long time ago, and it just wasn't that common back then. But, we offer survivorship visits here at Texas Oncology, and that's a part of those visits, is kind of going over fear of recurrence and just sort of normalizing that is common and expected. And I'm really encouraged that I think it's becoming more common to talk about.
Yeah. If someone's experiencing that their medical team, this isn't something that their medical team's bringing up, do you have any tips or just recommendations kind of for how they could start that conversation, or maybe who with?
Sure. So the topic of fear of recurrence, I think if the medical team isn't bringing it up, I mean, definitely I think it'd be good to kind of advocate for yourself in that situation, to ask about sort of, well, can we have some time to lay out my expectations of, as far as, how often I'm coming in and my follow-up plan, and if there's anything I need to look out for as far as symptoms or signs of recurrence, because I think education is really important. But then for that emotional aspect, if you don't have somebody at maybe your cancer center, like a social worker, maybe finding a support group where you can share with other survivors about fear of recurrence would be good, or even talking to a counselor.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, a lot of comments are just coming in just saying thank you so much for sharing your story. A lot of people are just finding this information very helpful. So just thank you again to you for sharing.
Oh, thank you. I'm just really glad to be here and glad to share.
Yes, we are glad to have you as well. And then just to remind everybody that this presentation was recorded. And so we ask that you give us at least 24 hours to buffer and make sure everything sounds good. But you should all receive an email since you registered for this presentation that will have a link. And then it can also be found on our Texas Oncology Foundation website. And if you go to our programs, you should see the webinar series, and there's also a webinar series archives, and that's where all of our presentations are housed. Well, thank you again, Vanessa, for being with us today. We appreciate your openness and your willingness to share.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
And thank you so much to everyone who joined us today in the audience. Please stay connected with the foundation, visit our website, like us on Facebook, be looking out for information on our upcoming events. We have multiple symposiums in the spring. We're going to be in San Antonio, Longview, Austin, and in Waco. So be on the lookout for that information and please join us. Lastly, as we bring this webinar to a close, a survey is going to open on your screen. Please take a moment, provide us with feedback on today's presentation, and also share topics that you would be interested in seeing covered in the future. Thank you again, everybody, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Vanessa. Talk to you later.
Bye.